thing, their share, from work alone, that they shouldn't have to work and borrow to go to school. And so what is a reasonable contribution for work? They use a presumption that the student works 15 hours per week and summers, and they take 90% of the state's minimum wage for that activity, and that turned out to be their earnings profile. It also linked well with what they believed if the student chose to not work and borrow, but work or borrow. If they borrowed, that would be a reasonable amount of borrowing for a student from a community college who completed. Now, the student going to a more expensive institution, a public university or perhaps a private institution, would pay a cost of choice. And that student might well be expected to both work and borrow as they went on. And so they came up in Oregon with what that student could earn, same earnings as a community college, but what they could borrow going into a high value but low wage position. They used teaching and social work as their examples, and they essentially set the student's contribution for a public university at that level. They provide the same. They expect the students attending a private institution to work off the same budget for a public institution. In their particular case, Minnesota has one that provides more for students in private institutions. But this is a way of saying, what is it that a student reasonably could contribute? Now, if you're going to say that students have to borrow, then you have to give them some capacity. And in the paper, I outline an pay-as-you-earn strategy using the federal government's income contingent loan program, and suggesting that there are ways in which you could build around that program, a state program, that said to students, borrowing is reasonable, as long as you do take out reasonable levels of borrowing. This is of substantial value to you, so why don't you go ahead and borrow, but don't borrow too much. And we will, as a state, guarantee that those resources are available. Now, in fact, what you're doing is guaranteeing the federal government, because it already provides that. But you could also build subsidies around that to help the students after they move on. So I'm suggesting that you revamp the Cal Grant program, piggyback on the Pell Grant program, and focus on the most needy students. That would be a very different program than you have today. Far fewer recipients, but those recipients receiving more. And I would suggest that the community college students ought to be eligible for that revamped Cal Grant program and get rid of that foolish tuition remission program that you have today that leaves so much federal government money on the table. And then building this pay-as-you-earn based on the federal income contingent program. Provide state finance consumer information. Your role would be sort of three. You provide better information, describing shared responsibility as a concept so they knew what their obligations were going to be and what the state's obligations were going to be. Provide a finance curriculum to schools so that students' financial responsibility, so that they knew basically a little bit more about borrowing when they went into it. Guarantee access to the loan capital. Federal government basically does that today, but this would be to back that up if for some reason the federal government didn't do that, and subsidize the desired activity after the fact. But you have a missing partner, but there is the missing partner in the shared responsibility up to that point, and that's the institution. They've got two responsibilities. One is to sustain the current level of support from the state, and I would argue that you could benefit from performance funding in that. Actually, you had performance funding